Hello and welcome to One to One. My name is Priscilla Nwikpo, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Noah Manyika, leader of the Build Zimbabwe Alliance. Let's get started straight away. Zimbabwe has been on everybody's lips in recent times, of course, you know, with the departure of Robert Mugabe. You want to be the next president of Zimbabwe.
That's right.
You've been away from the country for over 20 years. How do you think you're going to be able to do that?
One of the things that is really, that inspires us, the people in the Build Zimbabwe Alliance, is this idea that every Zimbabwean, first of all, is a citizen who has a right to determine the direction of our country and to participate in the rebuilding of it. That's something that we are really obsessed about, you know, and that's what has been lacking in the past 38 years, you know, just this feeling by Zimbabweans, whether they're in the country or outside, that they can fully participate in that process. And it's an honor for me to be doing this as well, because I believe that that will open doors even for some other Zimbabweans, you know, to aspire to that. You know, every citizen should be free to actually aspire to that. And with me specifically, I've also been going back and forth into the country. I'm based in Zimbabwe now, by the way. I moved back beginning of last year. And but even whilst I was outside the country, there was a lot of work that I was doing within the country in some of the challenged communities. So, you know, how would we do it? The question that we would ask as well is, how has it not been done? You know.
Well, I mean, Mugabe was in place for quite a while, generations, in fact.
Exactly.
So how do you intend to do this?
So, so what I wanted to say is that if the qualification for actually being able to build your country is that you're in the country, in these past 40 years, we would be a first world country, because we know that there are people who have been there who haven't done what they're supposed to do. Going
forward, though, for the future of Zimbabwe, why should they trust you?
Well, you know, I think this is where this is exciting. This is an opportunity for us to actually chart a completely different path for Zimbabwe, introduce a different culture of doing things. People should actually be looked at because of the ideas that they present. And I think if we don't do that in Africa, then we're in trouble. There's a reason why Meredith Martin wrote a book and says, you know, points out that 50 years after the beginning of the decolonization process in Africa, we are still, you know, where we were almost 50 years ago developmentally. So, and I believe that it is because of this culture of not looking at people in terms of the ideas that they present. And I think that's where we should go. Presenting great ideas is one thing, but you know that you need to gain people's trust. You've been out for 20 solid years. That's not an easy time. And in that time, they have become familiar with different figures, notable figures in the country, different leaders, different, if you like, rhetorics about the changes that they should have. So what makes yours that much different? Well, actually, I think there's an assumption there, Priscilla, which I think is a wrong assumption. The wrong assumption that I'm referring to is this idea that people don't trust you. Your own people don't trust you because you've been outside. I don't think that's true. Not that they don't trust you, but how you've not built that trust with them. You've not been in, you know, with them in order to build that trust. There are certainly people that will trust you, but you need to go further than that. That's why. How would those in the rural areas, for instance, get to trust you, because they wouldn't be as familiar with you as those in the city? Well, that's why there's a campaign. You know, so we call it a campaign, not just to use that word, but you know, you go out there and you earn every vote, and you know what? That's very, very critical. That everybody should earn the vote. In fact, one of the things that is really challenging in Africa sometimes is people assuming that people are just going to vote for them simply because they have been there. And so they don't have to do anything. They can just be lazy and just say, hey, you know what, we have been with you. That is not going to solve the problem of not having running water. That's not going to solve the problem of 90% unemployment. You know, it's not the fact that you've been there. It's the ideas that you present and how much you canvas for people to actually come behind that idea. And you know what? We are willing to do that.
You spoke there about earning the vote. For generations of Zimbabweans, they have only known Robert Mugabe to have been their president.
Yes.
And for those generations, some of them actually believe that he was their liberator. And so for those that worked with Robert Mugabe, equally as we have presently Mnangagwa, the current president, are they not more keen to say they're going to want to vote for him because they see him as a liberator?
Yeah, again, I think that's an assumption that people make. So let's go back to the history of our country when we got our independence. We actually fought and got our independence, but we didn't necessarily fight and get our freedom. We can't say that Zimbabweans feel like they are free to participate in determining the direction of their communities and countries and in rebuilding it because we got our independence. What has to happen in 2018 actually is that this election has to produce the convergence between independence and freedom.
Speaking about the fact that they didn't have freedom there, but didn't they feel that there was a degree, some kind of freedom when we saw, for instance, Mugabe saying to the British in that wonderful quote, "Keep your Britain and now keep my Zimbabwe," to Tony Blair as Prime Minister then. And that was that was as a result of saying, we had an agreement, and this agreement was that our land will be returned to us and not remain in the hands of white farmers. And Britain at the time appeared to be negating on that. And Mugabe said no. Would Zimbabweans not have felt at that time that indeed he stood for them and that they got back some of their freedom?
So, this is the interesting thing when we look at Africa, because sometimes we are kind of put in a corner to say, accept the bad or the average or the mediocre. The fact that there are some things that Mugabe got right is irrelevant. The question that remains today...
It's irrelevant?
Yeah, I think it is irrelevant. He got some things right. It's irrelevant to what we're talking about now, what we want to accomplish now. By their own admission, last year, the Minister of Social Welfare, Priscilla Nwikpo, admitted that 70% of Zimbabweans live under the poverty datum line. So, you're talking about four decades into independence. That is still the state of Zimbabweans. 90% unemployment in Zimbabwe today. The 6th largest informal sector in Africa today. Those are the issues that we're dealing with. The fact that a leader, comes and gets 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 things right is really not what we are campaigning about right now. We want our leaders to get right the things that assure us that we don't have 90% unemployment. The majority of our people are in gainful employment. That our industry doesn't contract, our industrial capacity doesn't contract to 20% during your rule.
I'm going to come to you to tell me how you do that, but you stated previously that leadership problems in Zimbabwe manifested into economic problems.
Yes.
How are you going to change the numbers that you've just mentioned there? Because they're quite high.
Yeah, they're very, very high. So in fact, thank you for pointing that out, because it actually makes my point. We have had leadership in Zimbabwe that has created all these things that we're talking about. This 90% unemployment just didn't happen. It happened because of decisions that leaders made. Leadership is absolutely critical. So you say, how are we going to do this? You've got to have top to bottom leadership renewal in Zimbabwe. And we're not just talking about the presidency, by the way. We're talking about MPs who have actually read the Constitution and who understand what their responsibilities are. We're also talking about a system of accountability for those leaders where if you don't perform, you can be recalled for not performing. And so some of these guys have been in power, as ministers for decades, but you can't go back and find one thing that they have done as ministers or as MPs that you could say points to extraordinary leadership. What we have committed to as the Build Zimbabwe Alliance is a program called P210, where we actually intentionally identify potential leaders, even though they may not have had a long tenure in politics, and then invest in them. Actually train those leaders, find training resources to make sure that by the time they're elected, they actually know what their responsibilities are. Have they read the Urban Councils Act as people are going to be councillors?
All right. You say that you're going to reduce governance.
Yes.
And as part of that, what you're going to do is just appoint, am I right, 15 ministers.
Yes.
Zimbabwe has over 16 million in population. And we know that the problems of Zimbabwe is in abundance, as you've stated. Will 15 people be enough to be able to do what it is that you want to do?
If the number of ministers was assured you of development, we would be a highly developed country, because, you know, ZANU-PF has had 30
You've
and
just
so on.
spoken there about leadership,
Yeah.
and you've just made mention of the fact that, you know, you want to train leaders into this position, leaders
Right.
that understand what they're supposed to do.
Right.
You know, certainly you're going to need a whole lot more than just 15.
No, but that doesn't mean more ministers. What we are talking about reducing is the size of the executive.
Right.
What we're talking about increasing is our entire leadership capital.
Right.
And every time that you know, when you talk about reducing the size of a cabinet,
Right.
you're also talking about reducing the size of the bureaucracy that makes decisions and so on. And one of the, you know, as you know, one of the biggest problems that we have is these humongous bureaucracies, which make it very, very difficult for timely decisions to be made.
Right.
So we're talking about reducing that. We're also talking about reducing the legislature, because there is no reason why Zimbabwe needs an average of 35 legislators per province. There's no reason for that. You know, you can't really support that, in fact, from a funding perspective.
I'm going to pause you on that because we're going to go on a short break.
Okay.
But when we come back, we will continue this conversation. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. I still have with me Dr. Noah Manyika. Just before we went on a break there, you were speaking about leadership capital.
Yes. So I think the assumption a lot of times is that if you have a huge executive, huge government and so on, you're expanding leadership capital. We take a different approach.
Okay.
You really have to turn citizens into participants in the process of determining the future of their country and rebuilding it. So you're really expanding leadership capital by bringing citizens into actually the process of decision making and so on in their communities and so on.
I know that there are some parts of rural Zimbabwe that's been cut off, for
Right.
instance. How will you convince me, as a rural Zimbabwean, to not only trust you, but also, you know, vote for you? Convince me.
You've got to go there, you know. So that's one critical thing. You have to go into all these rural communities, in spite of the difficulties, and engage people in those communities.
I believe is it Ziamba?
Ziambi, yes.
And they are. How would you get to them? You know, how do you get around this what you've just spoken about?
You have to defy whatever they do, and you know, some of us really need to get it in our heads that this is actually a revolution. You actually have to fight for that, because what happened with Ziambi is that we had actually been scheduled to have a rally in Zimba. We actually had police clearance to do that, and then he sent a message to people in the rural district council and said no political party is allowed to have a meeting here until after the election. Because ZANU-PF has booked every single day and every single minute until after August. Okay. But what we did anyway, in spite of that, we still went to that community because we had police clearance. And we went right to the ward level, and we talked to people at ward level, and they're tired of this nonsense. And so what you have to do is you have to go there. You have to have the courage to defy what they're going to do.
One of the areas that I'm concerned about is that we know that the Zimbabwean currency, for instance, it's non-existent.
Right.
So the economy has completely falling, you know, to nothing. How do you plan to bring that up to par?
Yeah, it's a whole. You have to have a holistic solution. You know, it's not one thing. You know, and it starts with leadership. The importance of leadership is that this sends a positive message to investors. And when I say investors, because a lot of people think that when I'm talking about investors, I'm not just talking about foreigners who want to come in. I'm talking about the Zimbabwean who wants to do something in his own country, who wants to build an enterprise in his own country. If there's the right leadership, if you have the right policy environment, predictable policy environment, and you have the rule of law, then you send the right messages to people who you want to invest in your country. So it's not just one thing, it's all of that. And then, obviously there are the legal issues that you've got to make sure you address.
Right.
Do you have a guarantee of property rights in your country?
All of what you're speaking about, education is necessary. You mentioned yourself, 40% is the figure. What are you going to do for that particular sector of Zimbabwe?
Well, you know what? Again, true leadership is really about educating people. You can't be an effective leader if at the same time you're not educating yourself first, so that you can really understand the issues, the problems, and then also educating yourself, equipping yourself to actually be a problem solver. And we are actually ourselves very committed to making sure that this doesn't just end with leadership. This also is extended to citizens.
Right.
In our political party, if you look at our messaging, for instance, we are very, very focused on that. We make sure that whatever we put out, we are fact-based, we are data-driven, we do our research, and we give people information that is critical for them to make decisions.
The current administration, they have links with China. We have seen what China has been doing in Africa in recent years, and of course the concerns that it has raised. In order to rebuild Zimbabwe, would you be engaging China to come in and to do various things in the country? Let's start with building infrastructure.
Yeah, so that's a very appropriate question. But here's what I say. I was having a discussion with someone recently, and I said, one of the things that is troubling about African leaders is that they always assume that they don't have any leverage. And yet all the people that want to come into our country, they want to come because there's something. That's our leverage.
Naturally.
Yeah. So if you don't recognize as a leader that you have leverage, so you can actually get the best deals for your people, then you're not supposed to be president. You are not supposed to be an executive. You have got to value the things that you have.
But then Mugabe was one that is seen to have stood. To have said no to a lot of a lot of things.
Yeah, said no to a lot of things and said yes to the things that have damaged our country. I mean, look at what happened in the Eastern Highlands with the discovery of diamonds. So look, it's not good enough, and I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier on. Somebody can say no, and there's some really good qualities. But then, if on the other hand, the things that you're saying yes to, he's the one who, by the way, promulgated the Look East policy. And said, these are our all-weather friends. The Chinese are our all-weather friends. Well, the Chinese are not your all-weather friends. The Chinese are the Chinese. And, we can't blame them for being Chinese.
No.
We can't blame them for having their own putting their own self-interest first. What is necessary is for African leaders to be able to draw the line in relationships with anyone. Because
so how are you going to draw that line where Zimbabwe is concerned? Because I imagine that your primary area of concern is Zimbabwe. When it comes to China, for instance, how will you draw that line?
It's not just China.
Well, but primarily.
No, it's not just primarily China, because to be honest with you, all the excitement that we're seeing even from Western powers right now with the Mnangagwa government is so that they can replace China with themselves. We know that. So it's not just themselves. So you've got to, this is one of the reasons why I said earlier, what I really want to accomplish is an unprecedented mobilization of Zimbabweans, to register to vote and to participate in this process, because when you have that kind of mandate, then you can draw the line with anyone. You have to be able to draw the line with anyone.
How then will you, in position as president, deal with the EU and deal with Trump?
Well, the same way. I mean, if you have the mandate from the people, and if you have, sometimes it's just the recognition that you actually have leverage, and I believe that African leaders, genuine African leaders, have leverage. They want to come into your country, right? These are your resources, right? So you have leverage, know? So you can set the terms so that you can benefit. If
you're in office, let's just say you get voted in tomorrow. What are some of the things you'll achieve in your first 100 days?
Well, very first thing, cut the size of the government, of the executive, down to 15. You can't do that with the legislature because, you actually need a constitutional amendment to do that. But, cutting down the size of the executive is something that you can do as president. You know, the second thing that we would actually implement, and we've already said this, is the devolution of the presidency, where the president would actually take up residency in one of the working residency in one of the provinces every month.
Right.
So you'd spend a week in a province. So that's
Right.
something that would happen immediately. And then obviously there is the removing of some of these laws that we have, like the AIPA and POSA, some of the very, very stringent laws. Those would be repealed immediately. And I mean, I can
the
go
list
on.
goes on.
Yeah.
So what if you don't make it? Would you remain in Zimbabwe, or will you return back to your comfort in the U.S.?
I love that question. That's why I said, you know, so that then answers the question that, you know, addresses the issue that I raised earlier on. I'm not doing this just to win an election.
Right.
I'm doing this to participate, because you know what happened over the last 4 decades? The problems that we've had as a country is because some of us went away.
You left.
We left.
So now you want to pay your dues back.
We have to pay our dues.
That's admirable.
We have to.
That's admirable.
And it's also selfish in a certain way, because, look, I am looking at Zimbabwe and I'm saying, this is my inheritance, this is my country.
Right.
I want it to work. I want it to work for me so that it can work for my kids.
All right. Lastly, you know, the Zimbabwean diasporans are watching. And many, like you, left. They were forced to. Not because they wanted to, but because, you know, what if they are thinking about coming back to Zimbabwe? What will you say to them to convince them, not just to return, but then to vote for you when the time comes in July?
Yeah, well, so I have to be a citizen first before I'm a politician. And what that says to me is I must address my countrymen respectfully and say, do what you know is best for yourself and for your families, because a lot of these people in the diaspora are not just looking after their children here, they're looking after their families back home.
That's right.
So why is it that that situation obtains? That situation obtains because we have a dysfunctional country. So what's good for you as a citizen in the diaspora is to make sure that we have the right leadership in Zimbabwe. Okay. And several ways to do that, you know. Go and vote, you know, for the right leadership. Okay. But, you know, vote for the person that you think has the best ideas. Okay. And hopefully, because of the work that we're doing, the ideas that we're you know, presenting, you'll vote for us. You know, but I don't take that for granted. Okay. I don't assume that simply because I was in the diaspora will vote for me. I will work for every single vote. Diaspora, urban, rural. And then we'll see what happens.
Well, Dr. Noah Manyika, I wish you the very best. Thank you
so
very much for
Priscilla.
your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.